Welcome to Dream Big with Big Dreamers, conversations for career growth, inspiration, and insight. It's time to dream big.
Craig, you have had pretty extensive business experience, and I was looking at all the companies you've worked for. It would be easier for us to list the companies you haven't worked for. I mean, you've worked for so many Fortune 500 companies. Well, what's interesting now, I mean, you're in executive coaching, and you have these basic themes that you think are good themes for most people for success. And the first one I am fascinated by is know yourself. In order to be a servant leader, you must know who you are, and you can't compare yourselves with others. It seems like this is the opposite we do with leaders very often, that we want leaders to focus on, to be empathetic and to tune into the emotional goings on of the people they're leading primarily. But you're saying if you know yourself, you're going to be better emotionally equipped to deal with the people you're leading, it sounds like.
Yeah, I actually think you'll need both, but it's hard to really have a grasp of other people if you don't know yourself and don't have a good sense of your own starting point. I often think about, as people are trying to think about their careers, they're trying to think about how to best support other people, and even, to the theme of this podcast about reaching their dreams, you kind of need to know where you start. And that means starting with yourself and, knowing who you are, knowing what you care about, knowing the things that are true to yourself, keeps you from being kind of that imposter who is off to please other people. For me personally, my faith is very important to me. My family is very important to me. I want to have fun in the things I do, and you referenced all the different, opportunities I've had. And, I found in my career and in my life that servant leadership was really important to me. So I've tried to bring an element of that to everything I do. And those principles help ground me. And I'll also say they help me keep track or stay on track, I should say, whatever task I may take on. So
I almost think that being able to know yourself has allowed you to reinvent yourself, because when we look at your past and all the things that you've done, it's this constant transformation and reinvention of yourself.
Yeah, in some ways that's true. I have probably learned this lesson the hard way, but I really try to take it to task, which is I don't try to compare myself to other people. I was taught early on, when you compare yourself to others, it's a trap. So the different roles that I may take on may not make sense to other people, but they made sense to me. And those are the kinds of things that I tried to keep track of, which was, other people may seem like they have their act together, they're smarter, everything comes effortlessly to them. But at the end of the day, if you start comparing yourself to other people, you just start to lose track of what matters most. And you can almost box yourself into a place that prevents you from taking some of those risks, taking some of those chances that really start to open up doors and give you chances to do new things and exciting things in many ways.
I'm interested, when you're working with clients, what do you do if somebody comes in with a complete lack of self-awareness, right? That they don't know themselves, that they wouldn't know themselves if themselves came and bit them, on their posterior. Like what would you do? I mean, how do you deal with that if they're kind of behind the eight ball on the fundamental principle?
Yeah, so this is probably a longer conversation than we might have for this podcast. But look, I think often we need to create an environment of trust and create an environment of confidentiality where a client feels comfortable doing that self-exploration about what's working for them at work and what's not working for them at work. Sometimes that entails being able to reach out to their colleagues, to their peers, to their subordinates, to their bosses, and maybe using them as a mirror to reflect back for that client of what their strengths are and perhaps what their development opportunities are. And then there's a range of assessments that I will apply as well that allows some self-discovery to happen so that by the client's own answers, they start to see back how they're viewed, what their tendencies happen to be. And I think, good assessments, good feedback from peers, colleagues, subordinates, supervisors is foundational to helping somebody at least start with their beginning of who they are and how they think about the world and how they operate, their tendencies. And then from there, you can figure out where that client would like to go and help them unlock the insights to help them get there.
You also, this is interesting. You say to people, question everything. When I was reading this, I was thinking of all the time I spent reading Platonic dialogues in college, and Socrates walking around just asking questions, right? And that was, the character is just a question asker. And you say that there's 4 questions you want to ask, you ask yourself all the time. Do you love what you're doing? Do you love who you're doing it for? And do you love who you're doing it with? And do you love where are you doing it? Do you love what you're doing right now?
I love what I'm doing right now. And I will tell you, at some point in time, I probably loved every job that I had. Those 4 questions. And, the important question I think to ask, and I'll come back to these 4 questions in just a moment, but I think the important question to ask in almost every scenario is why. The why piece is important. So, do you love what you do is about the role you have. So that's a question, but why do you love what you do? Do you love who you do it with? Is really about your colleagues. Are you enjoying working with your colleagues? Why are you enjoying with your colleagues? Do you love who you do it for? It's probably about your boss. And why do you love working for that person? And do you love where you do it is about the company you work for. And, why do you love working for that company? And the why really matters. And if you can unlock the why, that becomes repeatable. And if it's not working out, you can kind of figure out like, okay, well, what's not working about it? Why is that not working out? And how do I fix some of those things? Because something's not working doesn't mean you run away from it. You try to put your energy and effort into fixing it. And I would say in every, role I've had, I've been able to answer an affirmative to all of those and understand the why behind it. But I think that question why is important. And I'll tell you, there's a couple of reasons why, if I can continue on. One of them is I think when you can ask the why, it allows you to challenge the status quo about just everything that you're doing. I really do believe this. Nothing ever fundamentally changed in this history of our country, in the history of the world, without somebody asking why. Whether that is a civil rights question of why can't I vote, or why can't I eat at that lunch counter, or why can't I go to that school, whether it's about women voting, whether it's about any issue, social, political, or otherwise. The question why probably was the source of that. So there's a lot of external reasons of why to ask why. And then I think there's a lot of internal reasons of why to ask why as well, which is, why am I doing this role? Or why am I arguing about that with this person? Or why does this matter to me? Or why do I want to do this thing? It helps really unlock an insight, I think, in many times. And it probably gets to that helping you understand yourself a little bit more. And I think we all carry around often limiting beliefs about ourselves. And when you are asking the question why, it really forces you to tackle some of these limiting beliefs of like, well, why can't I do that? What's in my way? And how do you start to kind of identify the obstacles so that you can then overcome those obstacles? So it's a long-winded answer, but those 4 questions have been very pivotal. But the why behind those 4 questions has been even more pivotal.
And I think when you look at the different places that you've been, you've never really coasted. And I think you haven't coasted because you've said, hey, wait, maybe I feel stuck, or maybe I'm not advancing. Maybe I'm not happy where I am. So let me ask these questions. And if I don't like the answer, it's time to move on. And I think that's why we see that progression in your career, that there's a lot of people, they just stay and they're stuck and they can't move on. And it's those questions that I think allow you to break out of that holding pattern.
Yeah, I think that's true. And, I've had really great role models, external role models as well as internal role models in my family. In every office I've ever had, and even now as an entrepreneur, I've always had these 2 pictures on my wall that I've always kind of used as somewhat anthemic or symbolic gestures. One of them is Muhammad Ali, childhood hero, heavyweight champion of the world. And I have the picture of him because I always felt like, yes, he was a great boxer, but he was also a leader in many ways. And he transcended boxing. He obviously was a civil rights activist. He was an anti-war activist when the Vietnam War was going on. And there was a time when he was, banned from boxing for 3 years. And it's not like he went away. During those 3 years were probably some of the most prolific years of his life as he tried new things, asked that question why, and really made a name for himself outside of boxing. The other picture I have is Rosa Parks, who's probably the antithesis of Muhammad Ali, quiet leadership, a simple seamstress who just decided not to get up and move to the back of the bus one day. And that in and of itself was leadership and sparked the civil rights movement. And really created a complete change in American history from that simple gesture. So, back to, the comment about, why matters and, being able to have those kinds of role models that are external. But I would also tell you, within my own family, I've had really great role models of people who have been willing to try new things, do new things, continue to learn. That has been really close to home, a great model for me to try and follow as well.
I'm curious, as you think over the most recent years of your life, when you're asking the kind of self-knowledge questions and you're asking the why questions, what's a breakthrough you've had over the past decade or so where you've asked these questions and it actually changed the course trajectory of your own life?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think the one thing I would say is I've been able to say I can do more or I want to do more, and it's led me to take jobs that, as I said earlier, probably weren't very predictable or weren't the things that other people would have done. And it kind of led me to this epiphany of, a career path was more interesting to me than a career journey. I'm sorry, let me repeat that. I apologize. A career journey was more interesting to me than a career path. A career path is, a very linear thing. We're all taught at a young age, pick a career and then go do a series of linear things that get you from, point A to point Z. And a career journey isn't so linear. It's a portfolio of roles that you might take on across your career. And you'll build skills along the way. You'll get a chance to learn different industries, different roles, work in different environments. And as you kind of aggregate all of those things, it almost creates this really complex but accessible set of tools that you can use the rest of your life. So as an example of that, I started my career out in consumer packaged goods. After 5 years of being in a really well-known consumer packaged goods company, I jumped and went to the agency side because I wanted to see what it was like to sit across the desk from a client and have to serve a client. And I think it actually helped me be a better agency person because I knew how a client thought. And then I left because one of my clients hired me, and I went back to the client side. And then I thought I was a better client because I knew how best to work with the agency partners. And then, I left and went and worked in technology. I didn't have any kind of a technology background, but I was just drawn to where technology was going and the role it was playing in our lives. And I would even tell you, the last role I had was in financial services. Most people are kind of born and raised in financial services. I went into a financial services role when I was in my late 40s. And that's usually not something that somebody does. But I just feel like all of those why questions have led me to, hey, I can take my skill set that I've developed through this career journey approach, and they're applicable. Yes, they need to be applied in a slightly different way, but they're applicable. And then I have something to bring, but I also have a lot to learn. And that curiosity and wanting to keep learning has always been something that's fueled me.
I think this also leads to your third theme, play big. Why go small? right? I mean, these are all opportunities, and reach for them, stretch.
Yeah, yeah. I have a quote that I have always loved. It's from Nelson Mandela, which says, may your choices reflect your hopes and not your fears. And this speaks to some of those limiting beliefs that I referenced earlier. There are times that people let those limiting beliefs decide everything for them rather than letting their hopes. And I think playing big is believing that your hopes are greater than your fears. And I really do believe, and it goes back to knowing yourself, which is one of the first things we talked about, that, you can do this, you have this within you. But I think this notion of playing big and not shrinking away from the things that make you uncomfortable is important. It's good that we get comfortable with the uncomfortable. And like I said, it doesn't need to make sense to other people. It allows you to step into some situations that may be unorthodox for some people, but I promise you will be thankful for doing that. And I'll give you one or two examples, because I always try to talk about role models and people I've had an opportunity to learn from. I'm a military brat. So my father served in the Army for 22 years. So, we moved around a lot, and that meant new environments all the time. Education, being an African-American family, education, my father felt, was the great equalizer. So whether it was in the service or out of the service, we typically did live in white suburbia because there were better schools there. And my father and mother made a decision that was more important, getting an education, than anything else. So that put us in situations where we were not always in the most comfortable places. We might be one of two Black families in an entire community of 25 or 35,000 people, which meant you went to school and nobody looked like you, nobody thought or talked like you. So, it forced you to adapt. It forced you to persevere, sometimes in the face of rejection. It forced you to be willing to try new things. And I think all of those things are critically, critically important as an adult. While it was tough as a child sometimes, I'm thankful for every one of those experiences because it has armed me and served me very well as an adult as I think about my career and as I think about playing big. I think in some ways, not that I'm fearless, but I just believe my hopes are greater than my fears, and that gives me the confidence to step into those things.
And we're going to take a quick break right now as Donna is going to give us a word from our sponsor.
I thought you were going to read it, Scott.
Okay, I could read it. All right, here we go. Okay, here we go. So
I'm not ready to do that.
I will give us the word from our sponsor right now. Not a problem. It's never too early to create your own personal brand. ReadySetU.com helps students and young professionals build their brand as they embark on their careers. They develop compelling, customized resumes and LinkedIn profiles that will clearly identify who you are, what you have to offer, and what sets you apart. Employers may spend as little as 40 seconds looking at a resume or LinkedIn profile. So yours needs to stand out. You've only got 40 seconds. Make it pop. Their writers will partner with you throughout the resume and LinkedIn profile process. At ReadySetU, we want to help you prepare to launch your career successfully and enter the job search with confidence. It's not just about finding a job. It's much more. It's about finding the right position for you to begin and launch your career. And as Craig said, your career journey. The mission is simple. Help, encourage, inspire. They create your brand. You make the impact. Ready, set, you. Craig, it's interesting. As I was reading your 5 principles, I do love this Mandela quote because I think it's a great word for a chronically anxious society. I think that's something that describes our culture where we have so much chronic anxiety, right? And people, their default is not their hopes, it's their fears, right? And that, as you say, that can be completely debilitating, right?
Yeah, I really do think that's true. And as an executive coach, I have an opportunity to talk to people and get a sense of where they are on that balance. Is fear overwhelming their hope, or is hope overwhelming their fear? And I try to be attuned to it with my own family and friends. This has been a very divisive time in our history, and there's so much impacting people. There's so much uncertainty going on, this is a time of people at times feeling overwhelmed and losing what their compass is, or losing that anchoring point that may be tied to their hope and not to their fears. So.
You also say that it's never too late, that you're a lifelong learner, we've talked about a little bit, that your career journey has had a lot of interesting twists and turns, and that variety is a good thing. I mean, how do you get people to venture out into new things? Because I think it's hard. People are anxious. People are busy. People deal with insecurities, and it's often when you try something new, it can be embarrassing. It can be humiliating. After you've developed expertise in other areas and then you feel like you're starting all over again. I mean, how do you get people kind of off the dime and into the deep end of the pool and doing some experimental things? Because that seems challenging.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think knowledge is power. I wish I'd coined that phrase, but somebody else did. But I think knowledge is power. And it's amazing as you read about something, research something, do informational interviews, have somebody reverse mentor you about something, the learning piece starts to demystify what feels very risky or what feels like some big adventure or big challenge. So this notion of it's never too late is really about being curious, and it's really about being optimistic. I think about, before I made some of those leaps career-wise into a new industry or into a new role, I did my homework to try and understand, okay, what does that entail and what does that look like? Who can I learn from that's already doing something similar to that? So it wasn't just blindly letting go of one thing and jumping into another. There was a lot of work that went into that. But I do think, that kind of learning and that demystification of it, there's this opportunity to always keep learning. And, I will tell you, again, going back to role models, because I really do think it's important that you have people that you can kind of link to that have shown you a way before. I think about my grandfather, who became a lawyer later in life. He was a train porter for most of his life, and became a lawyer later in life and became a pastor in his 70s. I think about my father, and I mentioned, I'm a military brat, served in the military. He ended up getting his master's in his 40s. So I've had...
And didn't your dad work like in the White House?
He did. That's probably a story for another time, but yes, he did.
What did he do in the White House?
He was a military aide to president. So he was a highly decorated Army colonel and served in Vietnam. He was one of the few African Americans to lead a battalion in combat. Highly decorated, 2 Silver Stars, a Purple Heart, and was recruited and pulled out of active duty at the time to serve under a presidential administration.
Which president was it?
It was President Nixon, actually. If you think about that time of 68 to 72, probably similar unrest at that time as there happens to be at this time. If you think about the anti-war feelings, if you think about civil rights, here was my father as a military aide to the President of the United States, which involved having a front row seat to Apollo 11, Apollo 13, when Nixon visited China, the opening of diplomatic relations to China. My father was part of that advance team as well as accompanying him on that trip. One of my father's jobs, along with the other military aides, was to carry the football, the nuclear codes. So when you think about an African American in 1968 who had just received the right to vote a few years earlier than that, was now at the right hand of the president on these types of trips that were monumental at the time. for anybody to go on, let alone an African American.
Did he like Nixon? I mean, did he tell you stories about Nixon as a kid? I mean, you're like, well, all right, here's what it was like to be with the president today. And
Yeah, well, I'll tell you more than just us telling or him telling us stories. He's actually written memoirs, a memoir about his time, literally from growing up in the Depression, being born in 1928 to his journey to getting there. And that's back to this question about it's never too late. You've seen me jump from different career moves, even into executive coaching. Another thing that I'm working on is in the publishing space of taking my father's life journey and memoirs and doing a biography around that. So I would love to come back and talk about that exclusively on this, because that is one of these big dreams, dream big opportunities to talk about. But yeah, the book is filled with the behind the scenes of what happens in the White House during a presidential administration, from Secret Service to the West Wing, to how do you mobilize resources and forces to go get the president out to dinner or across the world for a diplomatic relations event. It's all got to be documented there. It's actually fascinating when you consider the time frame that happened to be.
Your last kind of principle is no one accomplishes anything alone. Now, I think one of the challenges is, as I think about that, is so many people in contemporary Western culture seem isolated, that through things like social media, we seem less capable and equipped to develop intimate friendships and connections and colleagues. But this is, you're saying, is something that is necessary, and along with the hopes, not fear kind of mindset in a culture of chronic anxiety, in a culture where people are struggling with loneliness and isolation. This is kind of countercultural, right? That you're not going to make it alone, that you actually need to be interdependent on other people.
Yeah, well, look, I think as humans, we are interdependent. I actually do limit my time on social media because I still believe the best human interactions are ones that are closer, not necessarily digitally based, but ones that are closer. And I would not be where I am in my career today without being able to show gratitude to my wife, Erica, my kids, friends, and certainly former colleagues and mentors and coaches that I had that were tremendously influential and teaching me some of these themes, reinforcing some of these themes, and giving me opportunities and support and encouragement along the way. So I have tremendous gratitude for a whole range of people, and it would be arrogant and egotistical for me to sit here and say, look what I've done. I did it all by myself. I'm not wired that way, and I think we should all pause for a moment and demonstrate gratitude to the people that do help us and encourage us and coach us and teach us. But then I would also say, what are we doing for other people as well? So I talk about servant leadership. It's a big theme of how I thought about my career and even why I became an executive coach. And I think our ability to help other people and serve other people and give back is an important part as well. So, in addition to being an executive coach, which I think maybe best manifests servant leadership because it's helping leaders be better leaders. In addition to that, I do a fair amount of pro bono work, which I am afforded the chance to do in my practice. But the last 5 years, I've also mentored veterans through an organization called American Corporate Partners. And these are veterans who have served our country tremendously. And after 15 years, 10 years, 20 years in some cases, they're trying to go back into the private sector. And after a career in the military, they don't know how to do that. So for the last 5 years, I've been a mentor for several ex-militaries, or veterans, I should say, moving into the private sector space. And it's been really rewarding to see the tremendous talent that they bring, the resourcefulness they bring, the grace they bring, the work ethic they bring. And that is my way of giving back the way people gave to me. That is my way of kind of giving back or paying forward in some way as best I know how, in addition to what I do as an executive coach.
I love how there's this full circle with, where your father came from and how he made that move from the military and now you're giving back. It all sort of weaves together into this beautiful story. And I love the fact that you're now going to be telling your dad's story as well.
Yeah, yeah, and I think you're right. My parents are very kind of embedded in my fabric and how I think about things. And I always kind of think about, my dad being born in the 20s, my mom and dad being born in the late 20s and going through just incredible headwinds, and how they always thought about, what they taught us and what they embedded in us was about, the quality of your character and, not holding grudges and resentfulness and all of those kinds of things. And I try to carry some of that grace and some of that humility and some of that gratitude that I saw them model. I try to carry in my life. I'm not always perfect at it, but I do my best to try and carry that forward however and whenever I can. So
well, we're grateful that you were able to join us today on our first podcast. Thank you so much.